Hello. Welcome to Better Conversations Live. We're
Howdy,
here, aren't
howdy.
we, Glenn?
We are indeed, yeah. Third in the series.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. So say hi in the chat or in the discussions if you're watching the replay. This is actually our last one for the year, last Better Conversations Live, but loads more to come in the new year. But just as a point of reference, most Tuesdays in the year we are here, right, Glenn?
Yep. 1 p.m. UK time, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. Check it out. And the
That's
replay.
right. And the replay. And when we are live, those are the times that you can catch us in your time zone or near your time zone. So as you mentioned, Glenn, this is part 3 in the course, in course correcting the C-suite. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, it's a one that I'm super keen. I mean, the first two, I think, set the foundations for this one, which is delivering an amazing candidate experience. And we'll go into that more in just a sec. Yeah, boom, 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 boom.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what we're going to be talking about. If you would like to hear more from Glenn, make sure you are following him. You can find him on LinkedIn there, and myself. You'll find me here. So yeah, Glenn. Let's get started. Maybe a good place for you to kick us off is explaining what a typical journey, candidate journey looks like.
Yeah, I think it sounds simplistic, right? Like candidate journey. Well, they apply, they get interviewed, they get offered the job, right? I mean, that's the kind of 3 key stages. It's not at all. You really need to think about the journey and the structure of that particular process from first contact, application, all the way through to offer and kind of onboarding. And it is a structured process that you really need to think about very intentionally. And then within it, on top of it, becomes the kind of candidate experience. So surprisingly, like I say, perhaps there is a perception that it's like a kind of 3-stage process. We were talking about it pre-show, right? I was like, these are all the stages. And you were like, okay, cool. That's probably quite a lot to go through, but it is. I mean, you go from certainly from an individual that's interested in a particular business, right? You go from that first point of contact. So whether that's you applying directly for the role, or the internal kind of recruitment agency contacting you and kind of looking to ascertain your interest in that opportunity. So there's that first contact point. Now, if you choose to kind of move forward, you've obviously then got the talent acquisition, HR pre-screening interview. Then you may move on to the hiring manager interview. Then you go into a series of interviews, or a loop, if you will, of interviews with other key stakeholders or individuals that are part of that interviewing team for the role. Then certainly from an internal perspective, there's like a debrief based on those interviews, a decision that obviously needs to happen. And then ultimately, if that individual is successful, that person will get offer. There'll be no doubt a negotiation. And then you get to a point where there's the acceptance. Then there's the pre-employment screening process, which every employer has, the responsibility to run, like right to work checks. Then there's the onboarding. Then you're a new joiner. So there's quite a few stages within that.
Yeah, but we know it doesn't always pan out like that. The real picture looks quite different, Glenn. What you've painted there is the ideal one. That's what we're here to talk about today, right? But many conversations that you and I have had is that this doesn't happen often in the way that it should happen for a candidate. And I know in your course you take people through all those stages at depth. So and you're here to put us right on what that
Well,
what that looks like, what that amazing experience looks like.
Yeah, I'm here to offer my opinion and my experience, that's for sure. And
Wow.
let me just precursor. I think, in slightly more kind of mature, larger businesses, there is a very clear structure to the kind of the candidate experience and the candidate journey. What we're talking to, you and I, typically are to that startups and scale-ups, right? Where they've invariably started their first experience of kind of recruitment is probably interviewing, talking to people in their network that have been referred to them. So that starts
A nice
from a
chat.
point. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It starts from a point of being quite unstructured. But once you exhaust or hit a saturation point on that immediate network, then you've got to go to the wider market. That kind of informal, unstructured chat, hey, Sehaam, speak to X and speak to X, and then we'll make a decision. It's proven, right? The statistics don't lie that it typically leads to a poor hire because the kind of almost like the assessment framework isn't there. It's not underpinned by objective assessment. So yeah,
definitely,
just to frame that, we are talking to the startups and scale-ups more.
Absolutely. And the thing that I see a lot, Glenn, is that people will hire on their knowledge, their subject matter expertise, very heavily, and less so on their what we've already defined as hard skills, which is conversation skills, and motivating to being part of a team. If you're leading a team, having the ability to motivate people and create accountability. Those are typically not things that, as a startup or scale up, is at the forefront of people's minds. It's like, we need this expertise, get someone in, and that might mean we overlook certain traits or capabilities. I know we're going to come to that maybe a little later, but so that tends to be heavily on the skills and knowledge side that there's a weighting.
Exactly. And that itself doesn't really talk to that individual's experience, that candidate's experience, right? If you're purely in a mode where you need to really kind of calibrate their skills, their knowledge against your kind of own benchmark in terms of capability, you're not actually thinking about that individual and their experience within that interaction. And this is the key piece here, which we're here to talk about is, and this is the question. So let's start with the question, right? The question is, what do you want that candidate, that applicant, that individual, what do you want them to learn about your business and experience? Through the process that they go through, what do you want them to learn and experience about your business? So there's two pieces there: the learning, the factual stuff, the data, the structure, the information that it relates to their day-to-day job. But what do you want? And you highlighted this perfectly pre-show. What do you want them to experience? What do you want them to feel? Kind of emotionally, what do you want them to feel through this process? And that question is your starting point for creating a candidate experience, essentially.
Well, it's in my language, I'd say it's about creating that emotional connection, and for that individual to feel like, I really want to work with these people. They're doing something amazing, and they seem like a really good crew. And that's for the candidate you're trying to attract, that's what you want them to walk away with, right?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And bit of a spoiler alert, folks. A job description on its own will not sufficiently deliver that experience, will not sufficiently deliver the information that individual would probably need. Certainly in a very competitive market where there are lots of kind of passive individuals that are not actively looking, right? And they're getting contacted quite regularly around new opportunities. What is going to make them say, yes, I'd like a conversation about your opportunity versus all the others that they possibly are being contacted about. And some of those, are ultimately certainly as a startup and scale up, right? You're not Facebook, right? You're not an Apple, you're not an Amazon. You haven't got that kind of brand, which we spoke about, right? They don't have that employer brand, or they do not have that kind of talent brand awareness.
Well, and something else, just listening to you, Glenn, I think is working for a startup or a scale up is a lot riskier than going for a big name brand, right? So that can be a positive, and it can have some challenging aspects to it, right? In terms of, I want, if that candidate wants security, or they are in a role where actually they feel pretty secure, and they're a passive candidate, as in they're not actively looking, and you're approaching them, you've got to address those, right? You've got to address that issue.
Exactly. And it comes back to presenting them with a job description is probably not going to sufficiently excite them about your business.
Right.
And you sitting there thinking, well, they need to do their due diligence on us, kind of check out our website, et cetera, et cetera. Well, ultimately, if your website is a consumer facing or business facing website, right? So it's there to attract customers and clients. It's not there to attract candidates. Yes, they'll probably understand the product and service, but they'll know nothing about your business.
Right.
You're actually what it's like to work in your business.
Right.
Certainly, like I say, as a startup scale up, right? So first and foremost, what do you want them to learn about your business? So alongside that job description, you need to give them more information. Then the question is, what information can you give them? So have you started to kind of construct some sort of employer brand proposition or value prop? Can you articulate what your culture is, really? Have you really started to define your values, or is it quite anecdotal, and depend on who you speak to in the business, they might have a very different kind of view?
Right.
What can you actually communicate that if that person then interacted with different people in your business, they would kind of get a consistent message, or they would get more information about the same piece of information, or a different perspective on the same piece of information. So it's like, that starting point.
And they've got to, it doesn't matter if people use different language to describe your values and so on, but there's got to be a synchrony, right? What you say got to echo what somebody else says, and probably better that it's not exactly the same language, right?
Agreed.
That can feel like a bit of a robot there. And also want to highlight on the topic of employer brand and talent brand. I encourage people to go and listen to part 1 in this series, right? Where we dive a great deal into that. So we're talking about the stage past that, the application stage.
Exactly.
What should happen then?
So, I mean, as I said, you got to think about, is this a push or pull factor, right? So has this individual applied directly? Okay, so they've read either the job advert, or they've seen a social media post or something. So they've taken an action to submit their CV. What do you want them to experience then? So is it, the acknowledgement of the application, not just thanks for submitting your CV, like something generic. It's actually,
someone will be in touch shortly.
Exactly. It's kind of acknowledgement of their CV, and perhaps some initial commentary on what they've sent to you. So you might go back with some questions. You might go back with some commentary on, could you just expand on X and Y in your CV? So it actually makes them feel like somebody, first and foremost, has reviewed that particular application and is essentially responding based on the individual application itself, which that's a starting point for an experience, right? Immediately, you're like, okay, so somebody's actually, in your mind, somebody's actually taken the time to look at my CV and responded and asked me questions.
Right.
That's going to increase their engagement. And I think that's a positive. If that individual you have contacted because you've identified them as somebody potentially that could be a good fit for your role, what do you want them to know? Yes, you've got a job available. Great. How many other hundreds of thousands of companies have got jobs available, right?
Right.
Why is your particular opportunity interesting? So start to create a bit of a narrative around the job spec. It's a story that you're telling, and actually start to offer more information about the business and kind of what it's like to work in that business. So what I tend to develop with startups and scale-ups quite quickly, yes, you got your job specification, but we can start to put together a 1 to 2 to 3 pager about learn a bit more about us. What's it like to work in the business? What are the, and start to talk to those things around value,
easy
culture.
to do.
Oh
Yeah.
my, yeah. I mean, I'm not being funny. This is not complicated stuff, right?
No.
This is a 3-pager on Canva, agreed with the internal marketing team. We're good to go.
Worst case scenario, 2 or 3 links, right, to your most recent either press release or program or something like that, links in an email, right? It's really simple. But I think just that fact that you you send something back keeps the conversation going. For starters, it keeps that candidate continuing to think about and be excited about the opportunity, right?
And it's interesting how much marketing collateral could be repurposed for recruitment, right?
Yes.
So if you're kind of a startup and scale up, your C-suite, your founders have been on kind of interviews, they've been on podcasts, which is a regular thing now, right? I mean, podcasts, interviews, they've been at events. Video content is really powerful. So if you've got a link to them on a live show or a podcast or something like that in that kind of learn about us pack is super powerful, because you're giving people more context beyond just the job specification, right? You're allowing them to experience the business. So that's the starting point.
So I've got a question for you on that, Glenn. If you provide that candidate with links to other things, how do you, would you take that into account in subsequent interviews, as in how much of those links did they follow and have a look at and have an opinion about? Would you be looking for that as the employer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and we'll come to this in the kind of TA pre-screening interview. One of the first questions is, what is it about our business that interests you and gives you the confidence that this particular opportunity could provide you with the next career step? So that's multi-layered, right? You can that question itself, you can explore a lot of stuff: skills, experience, what their ambition is, how they feel about the business in the context of the product, the service, the market, etc. So you're absolutely right. It's offering them information to then have a better conversation as you progress through that. And that wasn't even, I just thought about it. I was like, oh, wow. It just allows a better quality conversation in an interview, right? And that's the key thing that we'll come to, right? Interviews can be very much a kind of almost like table tennis, verbal table tennis, which it shouldn't be. It should be a conversation. It should be an exploration, exchange of information, because both parties are trying to learn more about one another. But yeah, that first contact piece, and you realize now how important it is. It's a critical, you set a precedent, a benchmark for the rest of the experience in that first contact.
Well, I just think that's a massive, easy to do, massive win. It does no harm whatsoever. And for the sake of spending 10 minutes picking out your favorite whatever's resources, dropping those in, or as you say, creating, you can go the whole way and do a 3-pager, right? That provides that.
And the key thing is, there has to be the consistency of that experience. You can't go with a big bang at the beginning and then the rest of the process just seem So don't take from this, you need to really front load this in terms of, okay, if we get the first contact right, then brilliant, everything's cool after that. It should continue to be consistent and or improve as an experience as that person moves to the next stage, which is like TA or talent acquisition, recruitment, pre-screening. So typically you would certainly, although some individuals may have been presented by a recruitment agency, it's pretty standard for the in-house recruiter or TA to at least have a 15-20 minute kind of pre-screen with the individual, just to kind of check on cultural alignment and or skills, experience, and just validate some of the CV. Now, depending on the agency partners you work with, if they're really well drilled on the business. That might be a 15 to 20 minute kind of conversation. If they're new partners, you might want to do a half an hour. But the key thing is, it's about certainly in that particular pre-screening, telling the candidate exactly what they can expect if they're successful in each stage of the process, how long it takes, what we're roughly planning to do. I mean, don't give them obviously all the questions and stuff like that, but you start to set the context for the process and allow them to ask questions around that, and maybe even challenge some of the process itself. So that TA pre-screen it allows you to learn a bit more about the individual. It allows them to learn a lot more about the process and the expectation. And actually, it can act as a real litmus test to their level of interest.
Right.
Because there's a time commitment that comes with that.
There is a time commitment. And also, I think there's an opportunity also in two directions, which is if your candidate is neurodiverse, that would be something worth finding out about and aligning about what kind of adjustments or accommodations need to be made for that individual. And look, if you might have a candidate who's dyslexic, in which case, think about written stuff probably isn't going to land so great. So don't, and if you don't know that they're dyslexic and they didn't look at the material, you might unfairly discount them. So the resources kind of need to be pick and choose, right? Menu without disadvantaging anyone.
Yeah, I mean a really incredibly important point, Sehaam, that you have to, as a business, be prepared to pivot your process to ensure that everybody has a fair opportunity to kind of progress through it. That's for sure. And this is the thing, each stage is a building block for the next one. So that ultimately the pieces of information that's shared and kind of gleaned from that TA recruiter pre-screen then starts to set a foundation for the hiring manager interview, which will be very much kind of skills, experience based, etc. But again, what we need to bake into this is the hiring manager communicating some or offering the opportunity to ask, have questions asked of them around, okay, what's the expectation in the role? What's the current challenges? What's the growth rate of the business, etc. Now, again, you need to think about this. Okay, how much information are we prepared to provide at this stage? Because ultimately they've got to probably one of the sort of key benchmarks and milestones of the process, right? The hiring manager interview. And that needs to be, for my mind, it needs to be at the front, at the beginning, not at the end, right? That first contact with the hiring manager it certainly increases candidate engagement as well.
Question.
Okay.
What if you don't have a hiring manager per se? You don't have that. Who would do that? Who would be the alternative if we're talking about a startup and a scale up?
Yeah. So I mean, really good question. So let's put it this way: if the individual that this role reports into isn't perhaps comfortable and/or ready to kind of step into that hiring manager interview, then that can be a combination of an extended TA, HR pre-screen, or I'd like to see another senior leader in the business lean in and actually, kind of support that first, because the hiring manager interviews is almost the stage gate to the rest of the process.
Right.
It's kind of that point that if the hiring manager is comfortable to move that person forward, they will. If they're not, and they've assessed that person as not, kind of the right kind of benchmark for the role, then that's the point where that person will probably exit the process. And the reason for having a senior leader or hiring manager at that first stage is they will be able to give some very credible feedback as to why.
Right. Okay. And I think that's super important, isn't it?
You start to build that feedback loop, right? So it's not just, a kind of one-liner, sorry, we're not going to progress you. The hiring manager needs to definitely be able to give quantifiable, objective feedback as to why we're not progressing that individual. And that feeds into the candidate experience.
Right. So it needs to be a leader who is sufficiently well versed and plugged into the business.
Yes.
Who plays that role of that initial short conversation to determine whether to move things forward. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that if it's the hiring manager, then that's typically going to be an hour interview. If it's a senior leader, that can be 30 minutes to 45 minutes, because you're structuring the actual kind of assessment process slightly differently. You'll be looking for different things. If it's a senior leader stepping in, maybe cultural alignment, they may not have the deep expertise to interview that person if it's a kind of technical role, or whatever it is. So that will be in the kind of series of interviews afterwards. So you do need to kind of calibrate on that. But again, I think in that hiring manager interview, if you will, the question again is, what do you want this person to learn? What do you want them to come away with in terms of that experience and understanding? So they've got the job spec, so they're pretty well versed in terms of the job per se, or at least the high level deliverables. They've had that pre-screen with the TA or recruiter, so they understand the process now. They understand the time investment, and they've got a bit more context in terms of perhaps the culture of the business, a little bit more of the narrative around where the business is now. What more can the hiring manager or leader provide at that stage that will be, that will add more value to, that particular person's experience? Now, it could be future plans for growth. It could be an expansion on, kind of where they see the kind of culture growing, or how they interpret values, how they've seen, if you have a set of values, where they've observed team members acting and interpreting those values. It's about providing more context, more information for that candidate to really start creating a broader picture of the business that they could potentially ultimately end up working for.
And I think that's really important for whoever is involved in those conversations to be clear about what information is shared and what maybe is more sensitive information, right?
Yeah.
But also so that it's shared consistently. So when you go from one candidate conversation to another one, you're not sharing, an inordinate amount with one and a lesser amount with somebody else. That again,
needs to be consistent.
Right. Okay. So it's worth having an idea about what that experience needs to look like, and maybe some guidelines around, to create that consistency. Right?
Yeah. I mean, and this is where you start to really think about, okay, our recruitment process can't be one size fits all. So if it's a technologist or somebody that works in data, they will have questions around your data warehouse, the size of your data, where you extract data from, etc. If it's somebody in finance, they might have already gone on the company's house and looked at your last year's accounts. Right. They might have some questions around that. So you've got to be prepared to be asked a different sets of questions depending on the individual. Now, one way to kind of circumvent that quite comfortably, as long as the candidate's comfortable, is to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Then that way you can freely talk about certain elements, certainly slightly more sensitive elements, but you can choose when that can happen.
Right.
So ultimately, you could do that at the beginning, at the hiring manager stage, or you could actually introduce a stage when it comes to pre-offer, where you go onto a call with the candidate and you're like, okay, you're under NDA now. Ask me all the questions that you want answered that will help you make a decision around whether we're the right business for you or not.
Well, and that will also help you determine how much energy you want to invest in the conversations, what you want to share as a candidate, right, about your experience. There may be a lot that you're bringing that is massively valuable to that business. And also, look, it's different, right? I mean, the set of skills and capabilities that you hire when your business is smaller is different to when you've got as you grow and you get more structure in place and so on. So,
Mm.
that's going to change. And sometimes there's a misexpectation, isn't there? If someone
Mm.
doing the interviewing
Mm.
has expectations of, that person operating in a more scrappy environment, but the
Mm.
individual may not have that experience.
Mm.
Those are things to get clear on. Is, what are we looking for, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that itself kind of feeds into the candidate experience, right? It's kind of the consistency of questions, the types of questions that they're going to be asked through the process needs to be consistent. And equally to your point, we need to be conscious as interviewers of, stripping out any perhaps unconscious bias that we can't, that's not relevant to the role. Just because you feel, and you've worked in this startup since its inception, it's quite scrappy, etc. It's growing, it's scaling, it's maturing. So what's relevant perhaps, or was relevant for the previous 12 months, may not be relevant going forward. And that should not unconsciously bias your approach to interviewing. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I would say the sort of best way to approach that is to actually take a hard look at the skills that you currently have with your existing team and identify where are gaps, where are the risks for us, right? And make sure that you are hiring not just for that, but as you say, for to fruit as much as you can and make sense to future-proof yourself to have skills that will be useful in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, right?
Exactly. And again, it's kind of taking a longer term view and realizing that your business will change. It will not remain the scrappy startup that it was in its initial early days.
Right.
It will change, it will evolve, and as more people join the business, that it becomes easier to really sort of define the kind of culture of the business when there's kind of almost more people within it, right? Because you have more diversity of thinking, and that adds to that kind of organic growth of the culture. But yeah, I mean, I'm taking off on a tangent there, but it is. I mean, again, it's like, how do you want to structure those interviews? How consistent is the questioning? How objective is the questioning? And that will be something the candidate will experience, right?
Absolutely.
And how creative is the questioning as well? If you're just reading a load of questions off of a kind of a sheet or something in front of you, that can feel quite robotic, and actually doesn't really create an experience in the interview. It just feels very transactional.
Well, and also if your questions are just one-dimensional, right? So you ask one question, you get an answer. Okay, then you move on to the next one. Really boring, and a missed opportunity to, the questioning should demonstrate that you're listening and that you're able to peel away some layers or go to a certain depth with that individual. So I'd want to know, why do they think that? How did they reach that conclusion? What's the experience they've So, and I know that's something that you go, again, it's an aspect of your course, Talent for Leaders, where you explore all of that with leaders who are involved in the recruitment process.
Completely. And I just want to just touch upon that point you made in terms of how to ask questions. It's, if you're actively listening in the interview and not just taking notes, if you're actively listening and the questions you've got to ask really well, right? So interviewers, please do not just drop onto an interview, open the sheet and start looking at the questions, and that's the first time you've ever read them. And please do not go on there and just try and kind of go on the fly, like, well, I kind of know what I want to ask them.
People do
You
that.
need, you need a baseline structure for consistency, and we'll say, this will link into the kind of debrief that we're going to discuss. But you do need that structure of questioning, and then if you're actively listening, you can start to tailor the questions to that individual's style of either communication and or link it to the experience that they've already discussed to bring out richer examples relating to that question. And equally, two things I always say to people. One, don't be afraid to reword the question. If you say it and you get a reaction where somebody's like, just rephrase it, reword it, and check and go, okay, look, the reason I'm asking you this question is because I want to understand this and this. Does it make sense? Otherwise, if you ask a really crap question, you're going to get a really crap answer. It's as simple as that. And then you can't turn around and go, well, that was a really, really poor answer from that individual. I was expecting more. If your question is crap, you're going to get a crap answer. Simple as that. So you need to be, you do need to actively listening and read that individual's reaction.
I think that's key, because you have to allow for the fact that nerves may be getting in the way, and someone may take a stab at answering the question that they think, and they think they've understood what the question is, but they may feel, and depending on the role, right, and the level, they may feel shy or awkward about, saying, I don't really understand the question. So look for body language, right? Read the cues that say, that question didn't land the way I wanted it to.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to interrupt somebody and go, so like, Sehaam, I can see where you're going with that, but actually what I want to understand is this.
Right.
Just work with them to get to the best possible kind of answer and, the best possible illustration of what you're trying to understand. Now, some people will be like, well, that's helping them. Well, yeah, that's helping them to give you a better answer, for you to have a better answer to understand, for you to make a better decision around whether they're right for your business or not on the role. So it's this mindset of, oh, well, if I give them too much guidance, it's helping them. Surely they should figure it out on their own. This is possibly, for some people, it's the first time they've been in an interview for a while. I've very rarely experienced people that are brilliant interviewers. I'm not a brilliant interviewer. I'm still learning. I'm not a brilliant interviewee either. So it's kind of, you do need to allow for this kind of slightly organic change of direction in an interview.
Right.
And that adds to the experience as well, because somebody comes away thinking like, okay, so they've really tried to understand what I can deliver, the types of experience I've got. And they won't mind being slightly course corrected or asked a question in a slightly different way if it makes them feel as though they've given the best illustration of themselves. So you've got to be, like I say, you've got to understand the questions and the objectives that you want from that interview to be able to really make that a very rich experience for the interviewee.
I agree. Can I add a little tip as well?
Of course.
Don't stack questions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like multi-layered, because immediately you can see people get the first bit, second bit they're like, oh, third bit they're like, oh man, I don't even know what that is. So I'm gonna answer the first bit really well. Yeah. Second bit I'll probably take a stab at, and the third bit I'll just leave and hopefully they won't ask me.
Well, it might be the most important one, right? So really important to not stack. And also not just from a comprehension standpoint. Look, the individual is going to be in a high state of alert, right? So it's a stressful situation. So throwing, a multi-layered question, or one that you put out there and then you reword a different way, can be quite confusing for someone who is on the autism spectrum or ADHD. That could be a real challenge, and great if they can say which of those questions do you want me to answer. But for them, that can really throw them and send their anxiety levels sky high, right? So those are important. The cleanliness of your questions is important. I guess that's what I wanted to
100%
add to that.
And again, it's not, don't just, tee up your questions, smash it across the court to them, and just wait for them to return. It's kind of, if you've got a layered question, start with the first part. Once you see that person's addressed that, just ask the next part. So it could be, okay, yeah, exactly. So it's there's a cadence to it, because they're already in the example that you're interested in learning about. then to extract more information from that becomes a lot easier.
So moving the conversation along, the better conversation along.
The better conversation, yeah.
The debrief, Glenn.
Yeah.
Talk me through the debrief. I mean, you've got some great experience and stories around debriefs. And so tell us a little bit about that.
So the debrief should be the hiring managers there to listen to the objective, constructive feedback from each interviewer. So they're sharing their interview feedback based on a structured criteria, a scorecard, a set of, kind of capabilities that they've been asked to interview that person on. They share that with the hiring manager. Then the hiring manager ultimately gets the opportunity to ask that interview panel certain questions around the feedback that he or she or they have received, and that informs their decision.
Right. And
that's
they being,
when it works. Sorry.
They being anyone who has interviewed the candidate, right?
Exactly.
So you've got the hiring manager who's kind of coordinating and making sure the experience is great. And then you've got every leader in the organization who has spoken to the candidate.
Exactly that. So that's, if it works really well, that's what happens. And the hiring manager comes away with, these different perspectives based on certain capabilities that they can objectively then make a decision on that particular individual as to whether they want to progress to offer stage or not. On the worst end of the scale, which I've seen happen, is where people just come on and they just talk subjectively. Like they open with things like, "Oh, I kind of expected more from them," or "Oh, the camera was not, right, so I spoke to the top end of their head for the most of the interview," or, "Oh, I don't know, I was expected to be more excited." All of these things basically inform everybody else because they're statements around things that, they're subjective things. They're like, okay, cool. You expected more based on what? You expected to be wowed. How? Why? You had an assessment, criteria. Let's talk about the things you were there to interview that person about. Keep your kind of subjective views on certain elements removed from that. Now, naturally, we are inclined to talk about how we feel, how a person's made us feel, how, communication styles, etc., etc. But let's start with the objective stuff, the stuff that we're there to assess, right? And then if we have to kind of delve into slightly more subjective stuff, let's try and put some structure around that, as opposed to, did I like them? Yes, no, did I feel like I got on with them, etc., etc. Because it does. I've seen it act as a domino effect. So I've read the feedback that these individuals have inputted into a system on the interviewee, and then I've seen their opinions completely change from one person's kind of opinion. It's like a domino effect, and then suddenly,
and that's someone who's. It does. Absolutely, it does. So the person with the loudest voice or the most influence within your team, leadership team, can really sway things in a way that may not be helpful, for sure.
Exactly. And that senior leader may have a different perspective, but it does. You can see that, and I've experienced that domino effect where I'm reading the feedback like, you really rated this person. Why are you now saying that you agree with X on the fact that they didn't have this kind of wow factor? Right. Where is wow factor in your list of kind of capabilities
on the job description? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, fair point, right? If you've got wow factor and that's underpinned by a scorecard with attributes and stuff and a scoring system, cool, let's go with it. But if that's just an opinion, a subjective opinion, it's really not helpful. It's actually unconsciously biasing or consciously biasing that whole debrief.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That the whole group that's been involved. So let's assume a decision's been made. So I know that's a massive area, Glenn, and I think it's not to be taken for granted that anyone can do that without any training at all. It's such a simple piece. It's like, is it on the job description? If it's not, then we can't evaluate that individual on it, because that's not fair.
Exactly.
Right? Not fair to have thrown something in. So out of the remaining sort of stages, ideal stages that we have, we've got, making the decision, offer and negotiation, and so on. Where would be a good place to maybe a couple of things that we have time for to kind of, bring it to a good conclusion?
Definitely. Yeah. So just a precursor, I mean, kind of interview debrief and decision is very internal. The candidate won't experience that. But as a recruitment professional, HR professional, you are there to advocate fairness in terms of the assessment.
Right.
Now, in terms of the experience of the candidate and interviewee at this stage, offer, negotiation, pre-employment screening process, onboarding, that is still a key part of the experience. It doesn't stop like, okay, the recruitment piece has stopped. That experience is great. The kind of almost like offer, peasant onboarding isn't pretty standard. That's equally important. So I always, my main rule with going to offer stage is be transparent. Have a very open conversation around what offer you're putting together, why. Listen to the person's feedback. Don't always assume. Don't always assume, oh, they just want more money. Listen to their feedback on the offer. I mean, if they accept straight away, then you've put together a really great offer and you've been listening all the way through. If there's a point of negotiation, listen, be transparent, be prepared. Don't do a lot of that on email. Surmise the conversation on email. Have those conversations over video or in person, right? Don't hide behind an email when it comes to emotive things like money, remuneration. That only enhances, that only enhances the experience, because you're prepared to very openly talk about that particular part, which is important to the individual. And then equally, in terms of pre-employment screening, is critical. You have an obligation as an employer to do a right to work check. If you don't, the Home Office will basically fine you 20 grand. So that's quite a significant chunk of cash if you don't do something that's very simple. So that there's key things in there that the individual may not know that that's part of the process. You may have discussed it, either or. That process needs to be really slick. Largely it's tool-based, it's automated, it can be very straightforward, but you do need to kind of manage them through that, because if you really looked at your contract properly, all offers are subject to passing a pre-employment screening process and having the right to work in the UK. As I said, Home Office comes knocking, you haven't done your right to work check, that's 20 grand a pop, minimum fine. If you've got multiple people in your business that you haven't done the right to work check on, just to keep adding that 20 grand by 5, 10, 15, that's going to be a chunk of cash. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
And then I think, that the onboarding and piece probably deserves almost like a show of its own, but it's equally important part. Please do not give them a start date, turn up on day one, give them a laptop, and they're like, hey, you can make a coffee over there, right? That's not an experience, right?
We're really busy today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's.
You have a browse on our website and
exactly.
See what you find.
Exactly, and it's that connectivity between when they've accepted an offer. Most people have notice periods, right? So that could be a month, 3 months, right? Don't not engage with them from the point when they accepted an offer to a week before they start with you, right? Get them involved in conversations that are relevant to their role, socials, etc., etc. It's all, at this point, it's beyond candidate experience. They're now like a new joiner or a new employee, but to them, it's an entire experience, right? They're not, those individuals are not sitting there thinking, oh, I'm a candidate now. Oh, now I'm an interviewee. Oh, now I'm somebody that could potentially be an employee. They don't see those labels, right?
No.
It's a journey for them.
Well, potentially also, if you're not in touch with them, you're creating a risk within your business. That
Of
means
course, yeah,
if, as time passes and they feel less and less attracted to the company,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
they may at the last minute not turn up.
yeah, exactly
Right?
that,
From a pragmatic standpoint, that's
yeah,
kind of really important, isn't it?
exactly, yeah. I mean,
Mm.
and it's an interesting one that um, it does come up, right? People are like, well, they've accepted an offer, super excited, they've handed in their notice. Oh, that's an emotional time, and then after that, it feels like everything's the same again.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
now they're doing handover, they're back to their kind of day-to-day job. And it's okay. What has changed? And you do need to keep that engagement, keep them updated. Send them stuff that could be relevant and interested. And hiring managers now, line managers, leaders, catch up with them, coffee, just to kind of check in, see how they're doing, keep them engaged. That's part of your responsibility. Just because they said yes to joining your business doesn't mean to say that your responsibility then is nil until they turn up on day one. It's a continual kind of
Right.
process that
It is.
builds that experience and
Absolutely is.
re-emphasizes and reinforces, the kind of culture that you have in your business.
So I'm guessing one of the worst things to hear, if you've invested so much time in creating an amazing candidate experience, is when leaders
Mm,
say, "I can't make that meeting. I can't do that interview."
yeah. Yeah. I mean, sadly, it's yeah. I mean, it's. I understand, kind of business priorities, etc. But at the same token, your responsibility is to put time and attention into the kind of recruitment process, or else, those things that you want somebody to do won't get done because you're not putting time and effort into the recruitment process to hire the person to do it. And I think it's. Yeah, I mean, again, you have to be really intentional, right? If you're going to commit your time to this, you need to allocate time to it. You need to make sure that you prioritize interviews over
Mm.
other things that perhaps seem equally, if not more important, but are they as critical? So there's a difference there in terms of, is it critical? Yes, it's important, but is it critical?
Mm.
This hire, I would say, it is a critical hire, right? Certainly when you're a startup and a scale up, it's critical because ultimately it's critical to your growth. So yeah, it's just
Well, absolutely. And that pressure that your team is feeling, or
mm,
that piece of work or program that needs delivering.
mm,
There's always that tension, isn't there, between we need someone yesterday
mm.
and let's get someone and let's offer that person the job. There are always gaps that we would rather didn't exist, but
Yeah,
that's very
and
often the case. But
and
it is
exactly.
part of the strategy, part of the
Mm,
tactical stuff that you've got to do as a
mm,
leader within a startup or
yeah.
scale up that you're wanting to grow, right?
Mm. And certainly, I find in a startup and scale up, unless somebody's incredibly vocal, they want. It's rare that I find somebody that's like, when are we going to hire this person? Because as a team, we're absolutely 100% now. We're really, kind of stretched. They typically vote with their feet, which is, I'm not staying in this environment any longer. I'm leaving. So, if they can see and there's visibility of the kind of leader, hiring manager, kind of really putting time and attention into the recruitment process, that actually has a net positive impact on the team,
Mhm.
because they're like,
Mhm.
this individual, this new team member is definitely happening.
Well, and the business is serious about our growth, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that demonstrates maturity. And at the end of the day, investors want to see a level of maturity that you can
Mhm.
manage these things operationally and strategically about your
Yeah.
business. And talent is absolutely. I mean, there is no
Mhm.
for many there is no business without talent.
Exactly.
So yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
and
giving everybody the visibility, right?
right. Right. So do check out Glenn's course if you are a leader and you're involved in the talent acquisition process within your organization. This is a fantastic. It's a 6-week course, and you get live sessions with Glenn, and he puts you through your paces too.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And one message I would say to, kind of certainly, kind of co-founders, C-suite leaders who are probably like seed, pre-seed, maybe going for their Series A. You may not be involved in recruitment now, but you will be. Trust me. Most VCs see it as 30% of your time will be allocated to hiring. So just as a kind of pre-warning there.
Right. If you've got targets for growth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's not one to ignore. No,
100%.
For sure. Wow. Well, Glenn, look, just say to folks, go and check out, we'll put links into the part 1 and part 2 of course correcting the C-suite on talent. And you'll also find, we'll be putting the links to these, to the series on that page, betterconversations.co/talent-4-leaders. That will be there. So, bottom line, Glenn, what's your key message?
My key message is, in such a competitive market that we are in at the moment, if you haven't realized that yet, you will soon. It's a massively competitive market. Candidate experience is key. It's the key to hiring great people. So if it's not something you're actively thinking about now, you're probably putting yourself at a disadvantage as a business.
Definitely.
Doom and gloom. It sounded quite doom and gloom, didn't it?
But it's actually, it can, get it right, and it can be a really great, fun, engaging, exciting experience. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than joining a new organization. People want to be excited about your business and working with the team and so on. So that piece is already there. Then you don't have to work quite so hard at that piece, right? You've just got to deliver on expectations. And so, taking the time to think about your processes pays dividends. And it keeps changing and iterating, as you say, as the organization grows. You'll refine and mature your processes and so on.
100%.
Wow. Well, we covered a lot, Glenn, as usual.
We did, yeah.
But that was fantastic. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Really, really enjoyed it. We've just got, I'm going to jump in here. We've got the lovely Mag has got some questions.
Mag.
Let's see if we can, she liked your comment about they vote with their feet. They certainly do.
They do.
They will head out quick. So this is a quick question, but a massive topic.
Wow.
She says, because we like to do this right at the end, right? When we get to the subjective part of assessing a candidate, how do you prevent echo chamber behavior and bias?
Oh, great question, Mag, and a really big topic. I think if you think of kind of unconscious bias training as a singular thing that everybody does and then it's done, you're missing the point completely. Understanding and educating the business around making the recruitment process fair means that you are checking your own unconscious bias. You are looking to limit the subjective influences on a recruitment process. And that is something that you will have to be brave enough as a company and as a group of individuals to confront and talk about and be very transparent about, and then put in place, because it's different for different businesses, how you're going to look to mitigate against that. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's no one perfect solution, but I think it really does start with being bold and brave enough to talk about it and address it and see what impact it has on your process, and actually by removing it, how much better your process will be for you collectively as a group of individuals, but even more for the individuals that are going through that process. interviewees, candidates, as it were.
I think that is a perfect place to wrap it up. So thank you again, Glenn. That was really lovely. I've enjoyed this series of conversations that we've had. It's kind of surfaced a lot of the things that you and I talk about offline, about the whole sort of journey and leadership being involved and so on. So yeah, check out the other videos. We'll put links in, as I said, to or look out for them on the screen. This is our last one for 2021. Better Conversations Live, but we'll be back in the new year. I'm looking forward. We're going to get Ben on, Ben Miller, to talk about his neurodiversity course. So that's going to be fascinating, and loads of other things that is coming out of the community in terms of questions and areas they want to explore. So just to signpost you to Glenn's course, there it is. You'll find us on YouTube. Do check out. We've got a bunch of other videos, lots of other conversations that Glenn has been party to as well. We also, there is a Better Conversations podcast. So do check that out. And if you would like to join us next year to come on and talk about a favorite leadership topic of yours, please do get in touch with any one of the co-hosts, myself, or drop an email to bclive@betterconversations.co. And so I guess we bid everyone a farewell. I know you said you got your hair cut and your beard trim for ready for Christmas. Your quarterly,
exactly.
Your quarterly trim. Yes, I feel like I supported you today, Glenn. With you had your curly out bits, and I got my curly out bits.
There we go.
And the pen made it.
It did, didn't it? Oh,
it got on there. It got on there. Fantastic. So thank you and take care, everyone. We'll catch you in the new year.